Hi, I'm your host, Jess, and today we're talking about what it actually means to come home to your body after trauma. This conversation is especially for anyone who has done years of therapy, read the books, tried to heal the right way, and still feels disconnected, hypervigilant, or unsafe inside themselves. Our guest today is Bee Doyle, a nurse practitioner, intuitive healer, and spiritual teacher who bridges nervous system healing and spiritual reconnection in a way that feels both grounded and honest. Hi, Bee. Welcome to Life After Trauma. I'm really grateful to have you here.
Hey, Jess. Thank you so much for having me. I am grateful to be here and excited for an awesome conversation.
Same, I cannot wait. When you're working with people now, what do you notice they're most confused or frustrated about when it comes to healing?
Thank you. I think that is such a beautiful and relevant question. And I think the biggest thing is that there is just so much information out there right now. We're in the age of air where we have access to anything we want literally at our fingertips. So, a lot of women spend a lot of time Googling symptoms, trying to navigate things on their own. And so they're just inundated with all of this information. And it causes some confusion about really where to even start on this healing journey. And there are so many modalities out there. And so people can easily get confused. Where do I start? Where do I fall into all of this? And that confusion can often lead to feeling overwhelmed as well with so many options and choices and feeling that almost like analysis paralysis, I call it, as to how do we even begin? I don't even know the way forward. So that's what I see time and time again.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and I completely agree. I have said time and time over that healing does not need to be performative. Like, that's what it feels like to me when there's, like, all of these different healing techniques, and it's like you just have to find the 1 or 2 things that really truly work for you, and you don't need to be doing everything.
Absolutely. I mean, it's impossible to do everything, right? Most of us have so many other things going on in our life as we're simultaneously trying to heal. And also, it doesn't have to be, healing, in my opinion, it's not a destination, right? It's always a journey. So finding, ways to allow that journey to really unfold that works. And it's not one size fits all. We're all different. All of our stories are different. Our traumas are different. How we go about the world is different. So to say that there's one thing or even a few things that are the things, would be a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you had language for nervous system healing or spiritual reconnection, what did unsafe feel like in your body?
Great question. For me, the bulk of my trauma came from my experience in the military. I was a combat medic and served a combat tour overseas in Afghanistan and really, really struggled with, that reintegration into civilian life. So I had many of the classic post traumatic stress symptoms that people talk about, the hypervigilance, always scanning, feeling like I was on guard, panic attacks, just really not being able to fall into my body. And I didn't have the language for it at the time, but I was so incredibly disconnected from my body as well. I didn't realize until I began my healing journey really how I was going through the world in such a dissociated state and processing everything as well. In the military, we're taught to really rely heavily on that logical piece of our brain and our functioning system. So, trying to operate from this logical place and intuition was a completely foreign concept for me. So, that's really where I was operating from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can very much relate to living in that state of hypervigilance. That was actually so when I was first diagnosed with PTSD, I remember I was in the therapist's office and she gave me this list of like symptoms of PTSD and she's like, "Well, do you experience any of these? Like how many?" And so I went through the list and It was the first time that I found out or understood that everybody doesn't feel that way. I thought that everybody felt that way. I thought that everyone experienced the same thing I was experiencing. And like so I was just like, wait a second, not everybody feels this way and I don't have to feel this way. Like it was very relieving to find out that it was a symptom, which if it's a symptom, then that means that it can stop.
Absolutely, and yeah, that was absolutely my experience as well. It was like, I didn't realize even how bad I felt until I didn't feel that way. Looking back, they say hindsight is 2020, but I think the tendency for so many people in trauma is to really normalize these things. It's like even the constant fatigue and just feeling horrible. It's like, well, this is just life, right? And that way we tend to really try to normalize. Mm.
Right. You talk about how dysregulation can quietly become identity. How does someone know when they're no longer just experiencing trauma responses, but organizing their entire sense of self around them?
That's a really good question. And sometimes I think this is done really unconsciously. We have these patterns and these sort of default ways of being, and we don't even really realize that's operating from a place of trauma. For example, I was recently working with a woman who I've been coaching, and we were talking about her tendency to really be an overachiever and starting to sort of unpack that. And, we kind of gently brought it to her awareness that this is actually a trauma response, that over perfection. It's like, well, how did you get validation growing up? And it's like, well, this is it. And so it becomes almost like part of our persona, right? But really, at the end of the day, that is a trauma response. And that can be so many different personality traits that we tend to normalize or say, this is just how I am. But when we sort of unpack and look back at the history, we can see the pattern, the thread there as to why. And it's like we as human beings are not designed to operate that way. And that's just one example from that, high performance, high functioning. And so that's another great point too, is that trauma can look a lot of different ways. It can look like that high functioning, overachieving, this woman who on the outside it looks like she's got it all, right? But secretly just burnt out, disconnected, and operating from those places of trauma. And so one of the key things I think in this healing journey and the work that I do with women is to really find those unconscious places that we haven't yet identified how trauma sort of sneaks in and shapes our daily operating systems.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I resonate so much with what you're saying. You know what just came back to me? It was so as a kid, I don't know if you experienced the same thing, but we would be rewarded based on our grades. So, like, if we got an A, then we got, I don't know, I think it was like $1 or $2 or something like that. But it was like every A that we got on our report card, we got a certain amount of money. And it was like, I never really connected it until as an adult, but it's like, well, of course I'm a high achiever. I was taught that I had to do that to be validated because beside that, it was like my childhood home was not a safe place, right? And a lot of my trauma came from that home. And so when it was like, okay, this is how I get validation, I get positive reinforcement instead. It was like, yeah, obviously I'm going to aim for those grades.
Yeah. And I think that conditioning starts, for most of us, especially as women. It's like, how do we prove our worth and our value in a society that is still very patriarchal, right? We feel like when we're conditioned this way too, even in the public school systems and things, that grades grades matter and everything is catered to these standardized testing and these comparative matrix, right? We're always compared against our peers. And so that desire, and then we get that positive reinforcement for it, right? It's like, oh, here's your, I was the same way. My family paid out a certain amount of money for each A, and I don't even think there was it was A or nothing basically. And so I learned that very young as well. And
Mhm.
so, well, my worth, my value comes from how I show up in the world and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve. So,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah. And I definitely burnt out eventually. Like, yeah, I feel like that's yeah, it's inevitable when you're in a place where your like you said, your value and your worth has been tied to what you're achieving. I think it's inevitable that eventually you're gonna burn out.
absolutely. I say we are human beings, not human doings, right? So eventually all of that doing will catch up. And I think it causes even more trauma for people when they try to just put their head down and ignore that and push through the burnout. And eventually things fall apart, right? When we continue to ignore those warning signs and continue to push and push and push.
Yeah. So, what would you recommend for people um to not push through it? Like, maybe it's, like, for them to notice even if they're in that place in the first place.
Yeah, great question. Because again, I think we normalize so many of these symptoms, the chronic fatigue and the exhaustion. And for most women, we have so much on our plate, so we think this is just how we are supposed to feel, right? But the body is always giving us silent messages, right? We're not also designed to be exhausted and be fatigued. And for me personally, so much of my healing journey came when my body literally shut down essentially. I ended up trying to pushing through all the trauma, not even recognizing how much trauma I was carrying, and I ended up developing an autoimmune illness. And so that was sort of like, okay, my body said, I tried to give you the signals, I tried to warn you, and I continued to push, and this is the result, right? And so that's now something that I also have to work with, right? And it's about honoring ourselves. And again, this is something that we're not taught. We are taught quite the opposite, really achieve and push. But it's almost like a paradigm shift is on the horizon. This is how we heal. And our nervous system cannot heal from that place of pushing and survival. I'm a big fan of what's known as the polyvagal theory and this whole idea that biologically we cannot heal when we are in that state of fight or flight or freeze. We have to get to this place of safety. And most of us don't even realize how unsafe we are operating from. And so it's learning safety. That is always step one when I'm working with people. We have to find the little glimmers of safety, I call it. And it starts really with ourselves, our body, and learning about how we can reconnect. And something I always teach first is reconnection to the body through the breath. Because we carry our breath with us everywhere. It costs nothing. We're already breathing. So why not do it in a conscious way that actually helps us reconnect to ourselves? And I mean, this is a beautiful place where science meets spirit, which is what I love. I'm a nurse practitioner as well as an intuitive healer. So anywhere I find these places where science meets spirit, I'm like, yes, this is my jam, right? And so we know how powerful the breath is, how it can connect us back to our body, and how it can start developing the neural pathways in the brain for the safety signals.
Right. I'm starting to feel like we've had a very similar path. I just was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease a month ago. So, Yeah, yeah, I hear you that I'm still very much in the processing, but it's something that we have to consider. I have to now take into consideration for the rest of my life. No, yeah, a lot comes up with that. Um,
Yes, and, it goes back to the idea that the body really does keep the score, right? If we're And it's energy, it's frequency, it's vibration. So if we have these traumas and unhealed places stuck within our system, it is going to manifest some way, somehow. And so many women, I mean, the statistics are crazy how many of us are dealing with these autoimmune issues.
for
And my
sure.
personal belief from, again, both sides, being the provider and the patient, is that it's really that unresolved trauma trying manifesting, coming in the body saying, "Hey, I've been trying to get your attention. Now now I'm here and we have to deal with this."
So, okay, I have to ask you because I completely agree with you. I believe that that is the same thing. So now we're coming at this from a personal place now. I'm like,
Yes,
because
right?
I completely agree that it is unresolved trauma. But when I found out, when I was diagnosed, I was like, "But hold on a second, because I have done all of this work, and I have, like, worked through so much." I thought that I had worked through everything. And so I'm like, "How is there still unresolved stuff in there that's potentially causing this?" So, what would you say to somebody like me?
Well, first and foremost, give yourself compassion, give yourself grace. Yes, you have done an incredible amount of healing. But a point that I always like to make and to remind people, and something that I also work with in my body of work, is this idea of ancestral healing. You're not just coming into this lifetime with your wounds and your hurts. This is generations deep. So give yourself some grace, right? And going back to what I said in the beginning, healing is not some sort of destination where all of a sudden we just arrive, right? It's about peeling back layer after layer after layer after layer. And in my opinion, it really is the lifetime's work, right? We're always trying to expand consciousness, become a little bit more aware, and just bearing in mind that we do come in with wounds that are not ours. So give yourself some grace as things start to, as that healing journey deepens, and just self compassion and self love and honoring where you're at. These things come up for a reason, and it's not because you haven't healed enough or done enough work or dug deep enough. It's just another part of the journey.
Exactly, and I think, like, the things that you are saying, the self-compassion and the self-love, that is definitely what's been helping me get through this, especially this, like, early phase where I'm still processing and learning everything and having to deal with, like, all of that identity shifts and everything. So, yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like the next question I have kind of ties in really nicely with what you were talking about. So, a lot of people listening have tried therapy, somatic work, breath work, spirituality, sometimes all of it. What do you notice is still missing for people who say, "I've done everything and I still don't feel safe inside myself?"
Yeah. Well, I just want to honor and hold space for that because, again, it is such a journey. And for most of us, it is a lifetime's work. And there are absolutely still times where, I become triggered. I am back into that old part of myself. And so making that space and making that self compassion, and a very lovely point that I like to work with as well is, healing and curing are not the same things. And in our Western mind, our Western culture, we are very cure focused, right? We just want to be cured of whatever this thing is and be done with it for good. And that is very different, right? We want that
Yep.
quick fix. And there's so much of that out there, so much of that rhetoric where well, if you just do this style breath work or come to this retreat, you will be cured. And it's like, no, it is a healing journey for a reason. And healing is about learning to integrate. Whereas curing is like, I just want this gone. I want it gone forever, gone out of my awareness. And healing is about learning to integrate. And so when we look at our journey through that lens, I think it shifts the perspective a little bit. And yes, there are still times, even for the people who show up as appearing like the most healed and spiritual person, they still go through these periods, right? And it's also very cyclical, in my opinion. Sometimes things are going really well, and then something happens, and we can quote, but backslide, if you will. But it's just a journey. And so give yourself some grace and compassion, and also keep going. If you're doing the work, that's beautiful. That's expanding consciousness. Because another thing I love to discuss is that the healing journey, it's not just something we do to better ourselves, right? It's, in my opinion, it should be a societal mandate, right? It's like when we show up and we're doing the work, we can have that ripple effect out into the world. And it's not just personal at that point. We're truly healing for our ancestors, we're healing for the children, for the next generations. And that's big work. So give yourself some grace.
Yes, yes, it really is.
Even just thinking and you have this awareness of like I'm doing the work, like that is huge because not everybody is. I mean, just look around the world, right? So much self-compassion and so much self-love has just been key.
Yeah. Well, and it's not easy to do, right? Which is why there are a lot of people who choose to not do it.
Mhm.
So yeah, like if you are making that choice to do that hard work, then you deserve an applause.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, you were talking about, like, the backsliding. I was gonna say it's like that 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of thing, but as long as you're, like, still moving forward in some way, even if you take a pause at any point. Like, I have on my own healing journey, I've taken time where, like, I didn't work on anything for a full year, or I think at one point there was even, like, 2 years where I was just like, "Nope, I just need to I just need to not." And that's okay. But
Yeah.
I also think that it's so important that we are sharing our stories because like for myself, like I have a podcast. I never want somebody to watch the podcast or listen to the podcast and think, "Oh, she has it all together, like she's perfectly healed." That is not the case. And I just want to normalize that even though I am having these conversations, I am by far not healed.
Yeah, it's about bringing awareness to the topic in general, right? And this understanding that healing doesn't look a certain way, right? It's again not somewhere we land, some sort of destination. It's a journey and such a beautiful journey to really be doing that work. And my favorite part of it is just peeling back the layers and learning more and more about myself with each phase of the process. And then being able to come back to the table for somebody who's in a different place in the healing journey and say, kind of compare notes, if you will, right? It's like, this is what's worked for me, this is what's not worked, and just trying to instill hope in other women who are on that similar journey. Because again, there's so much information out there, and what's missing, I think, when we do the Dr. Google and everything is that human connection, right? That community around healing. That's another big part of the polyvagal theory is sort of that importance of coherence and how we can heal in communities in a much, more successful manner as well.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Mhm.
So there's a point where healing can start to look like another form of self-monitoring or self-policing. Kind of like what we were talking about before, where like it's almost like performative healing. How do you differentiate between practices that are actually supportive and ones that just teach people to manage themselves better for the world?
That's such a relevant question. I love that. And yes, performative healing. It's like, look, I'm doing the work, I'm on this journey. But to me, what it's really about is how we move through day to day life. I once had a lovely teacher who, we were discussing meditation and how these practices sort of translate into, like, quote, the real world. And she just said the simplest but most profound thing. It was like, how do you keep up with your spiritual practice? And she said, I wash the dishes. In other words, it's not because I think when we get on this healing path and the spiritual path, sometimes it's like, well, I can sit in ceremony and go on retreats all day long. And of course, I feel great and I feel wonderful. But that's not it. It's how do we bring these things back and apply them to the real world and really make meaning and do impactful work and create from a place of love? That's when it becomes not performative, when we're actually truly coming from this place of wanting to do the work to be of service, not just to ourselves, but to the world. And so finding what that is for each of us, right? That's the real work. When we can be in that authenticity, we have the confidence to show up and do what we know in our soul that we're meant to do. That's the real healing work, and that, I think, authenticity, that alignment, it comes, and that's not performative.
Yeah, and it's like finding those things that you can work into your everyday life.
Absolutely, those things that truly translate into how do I show up and be the best version of me, not the version that everyone thinks I should be, but truly finding that authenticity. So much of the healing journey is about that, finding who we truly are. Because if you think about it, so much trauma comes from all the places where we were told to conform, to fit into these boxes, to perform. And so it's such a journey of unlearning and showing up and figuring out who we really are when we strip all that away underneath that conditioning, that trauma, all the hurts, the hardness of our heart, and we begin to really open up in an authentic and aligned way.
Yeah, that leads perfectly into my next question. You describe self trust as the final stage of healing. What does self trust feel like before it looks like confidence? Like that messy middle, what does it feel like in that messy middle?
Yes, the place I find myself often, right?
Don't
Gosh,
we all?
yes, I thought I had this one nailed down, but that messy middle, it's learning to really cultivate and trust that intuition. And there are many ways. I mean, we could have an entire episode on cultivating intuition itself, but it's finding that flow, finding that alignment, and slipping back again, too. How many times have I know for me, it's like, dang it, I should have listened to that little voice. I just knew. Like when my puppy went potty on the floor today, 2 seconds before that, I'm like, she needs to go out. Did I listen to that little voice? No. So it's very messy, right? Literally and figuratively sometimes. But learning that self-trust comes with repetition. Like anything else, when we talk about self-trust, and sometimes I use that term intuition interchangeably, it's like flexing a muscle. The more that we use it, the more that we lean into that and we get that little gut feeling and we're like, that's it. That's it. I need to go with that. And again, this is not base operating for most of us. We are taught to operate very much from that logical brain. And how many times, even in our standard systems, are we as women gaslit and, oh, that symptom is not that. And so there's so many ways that it's like being, pinned against us. So learning to really deepen into that trust and knowing that you'll slip up, you'll fall back into that place of strictly operating from logic, but practice, 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 practice. And the more that you fall into that, you're like, oh, yeah, I do have this. I got this.
Yeah, it starts to become second nature. Like, it's where you start to operate from first.
Mhm. Yep. You're like, let me find that intuitive knowing, and then I will put the logic brain to work to put these plans in action. But you find that knowing, and it becomes second nature. And not to say that we don't go back into that messy middle, right? Because this healing journey is so very cyclical. But yes, that operating system of intuition has been so key in my healing journey. And even when people are telling me something is not, when I know it is. So it's also about, learning to stand up for ourselves. And eventually that's where the confidence comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something that really was key in my, healing journey was I started to like, before decisions, I started to check in with my body first, and I would be like, "Okay, what is happening in my body when I think about both options or all of the options?" And I would really try to, like, feel into each one, instead of logically thinking about them, but, like, what is my body trying to tell me? And then from there, like, once I've found where my body is kind of pointing, then at that point, I can bring in the logistics.
Yes, I do a similar method. It's just heavy or light. Is this heavy in my body? And, everyone can kind of work with what heavy feels like. It may show up differently. Or is it light? What is heavy in the body is always a lie. Always a lie. Something is misaligned if you're feeling heavy or contracted or like, just doesn't feel right, because the truth is light. Love is light. All things that come from that space feel a different way in the body. And there's so many other things too. I've worked with, like, you can cross your arms and think about the question and, find out for your body what's a yes, what's a no, if you kind of sway backwards or lean a little bit forward. So there are just tons of little practices that you can use as tools to learn to cultivate and trust and lean into those inner knowings, inner intuition.
Yeah, so on that, before we move toward closing, would you be open to offering something very simple? Not to fix anyone, just to help them feel their body again?
Absolutely. How about we start with the breath?
Perfect.
Favorite tool. And when we are operating from that fight or fight place for so long, many of us actually begin to breathe in reverse, which is wild to think about. So my invitation is, if listeners are in a place where they can softly close down their eyes for a moment and put one hand on the belly and one hand on the heart. And with that inhale, focus on the hand that's on the belly. So that hand that's on the belly should rise with each inhale. And then slowly, as you exhale, the abdomen, the belly should move back towards the spine. So inhale, abdomen rises. Exhale, abdomen comes back towards the spine. And working with this practice for even 3 minutes, just cultivating those nice, long, slow, deep breaths is such a beautiful place to start. And really focusing on allowing the belly to expand. And if you find that you are breathing in reverse, that you are one that sort of contracts or pulls the navel in with the inhale, make this a conscious practice. Do this at least 10 minutes a day. You can break it up in several different sessions. But if you can get that breathing back to the pattern it's supposed to be in, your body will start to learn that safety. The safety signals will start to come online in the brain, and it truly does start with the breath. If we're connected to our breath, it brings us back to the body. The body follows the mind, and the mind follows the breath.
I love the breath.
Like, we have it, we carry it with us. It's our best tool, and it's free, right?
Exactly, and even just one, like, intentional, conscious breath before I'm about to do something where I'm a little nervous, I have some anxiety. Even just, like, taking one breath helps me. It's wild.
Mhm. It can absolutely bring you back, and just coming into that body, and it's like, ah, one breath immediately, that parasympathetic rest and digest part kicks on and says, "Okay, I remember this place. We're safe here. We're safe here."
It's so amazing. So I always like to ask one closing question. What does life after trauma mean to you?
Life after trauma means to me an endless journey of self exploration and cultivating hope and joy for other people who can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel. I consider myself to be a lighthouse for other people. And so keeping that spark alive with me is that life after trauma.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, thank you.
What's really staying with me from this conversation is the importance of coming home to ourselves and coming back into our body and finding the simple ways to do that, like by using the breath, which is so easy to do. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
Just again, I want to drive home that point of self compassion and self love because, again, there's so much information out there. Where do you start on this healing journey? Just giving yourself that compassion and love. Find the breath, find the stillness, and your healing matters. Healing is not selfish. You deserve to live a beautiful life. So find that for yourself.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Where can everyone come connect with you?
So I am Double Libra Coaching on Instagram, and my website is Double Libra Astrology. Please do check the website, sign up for my newsletter, and stay up to date on my book release coming up and all the wonderful things I have going on in my community. So I hope to see some of you there.
So exciting. I will have everything linked in the show notes. And if you are finding value here, following the show is the simplest way to support it. Until next time, take care of your mind, body, and soul.
Thank you, Jess.